Hello everybody, we are going to be talking all about appraisals in this video, so check it out. Hello everybody, welcome to the channel. My name is Daniel Ackerman. I'm a realtor in New York City with the Queens home team of Keller Williams, serving Manhattan, Queens, and Brooklyn, and helping sellers, buyers, and investors in real estate with knowledge, integrity, and professionalism. Welcome to the channel. If it's your first time here, make sure to subscribe to the channel. There's a button down below right here. Just go ahead and click that and subscribe, and make sure to hit the bell and you'll get notifications of all the new content on this channel. Now, what we're talking about this week is appraisals. In this video, we're going to cover appraisals. Now, the appraisals and the appraisal process are pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of complexity to it, but there are a few points that buyers and sellers often have questions about that I'd like to make sure that we go ahead and clarify. One of the first questions to answer is, who orders an appraisal? Well, that question can have a couple of different answers depending on where you are in the ownership or selling process on a property. Now, typically, we think about appraisals being ordered during a purchase, during the process of a purchase, and it's typically done once something goes under contract. Once the purchase is under contract, okay, there's a fully executed contract by buyer and seller with a deposit, then typically the bank that is providing the loan to the buyer would order the appraisal. And so once again, once you go under contract, if it's a financing deal and there's a loan being given by a bank to the buyer, then the bank would typically order the appraisal. A seller or a homeowner can also order an appraisal, usually prior to selling or during the term of ownership, to establish a value of their home for either purposes of insurance or getting a sense for what the market value is before bringing a property to market. So that's who orders the appraisal and when. Now, that begs the question, why is the appraisal ordered? Well, it's very simple. In the purchase process, whoever is putting up the money for the purchase, whether that's the buyer or a bank, wants to be sure that they aren't overpaying for the property. The bank especially, they're lending out money, they are incurring risk by lending out that money, and the collateral for that loan is actually the house or the property. So the property itself is the collateral for the loan. So they need to make sure that the collateral for the loan is worth the amount of money that they're lending out. Now, this is a good time to segue into another point, which is, what is the difference between appraisal amount and loan amount? The loan amount is going to be some portion of the overall value of the property. So for example, if a property is worth $1 million, just to use a nice round number, and the loan is up to 80% of the value of that property, which is pretty typical for a conventional loan, then the loan amount can be up to $800,000. Now, this is going to be important when we talk about what happens when appraisals come in low. But just keep in mind that the appraisal amount is the overall value of the property, while the loan amount is some portion thereof. It could be 60, 70, 80, 90%, could be up to 96.5% if you're getting a 3.5% down loan, which is possible. So that's the difference between the loan amount and the appraisal amount. All right, and the bank is going to use the appraisal amount to determine how much money they can safely lend out to the borrower. So this brings us to our next question, which is a low appraisal good for the buyer? And the answer to that question isn't as clear-cut as you might think. It can be good for the buyer, but it can also be a difficulty for the buyer. So let's use our same example. Buyer has made an offer on a home at $1 million. It's been accepted by the seller. It's gone under contract. And the loan that the buyer has was pre-approved for $1 million purchase and up to 80%. So far so good. Everything seems okay. Now the appraisal happens. And the appraisal comes in a little bit low, say $900,000, which is, that's a significant amount. That's 10% below value. Now the bank, if you remember, is only going to give a certain portion of the overall value of the home in the form of the loan. So just because you were pre-approved for $1 million and the bank is going to give you 80% down up to $800,000 doesn't mean that they'll give you the same $800,000 when the property appraises low at $900,000. Most likely that bank is still going to give out only 80% of the value. Now $900,000 times 80% would be, if my math is correct in my head here, would be $720,000. You guys can check on your own calculators. So that means that now the borrower, the buyer, isn't going to get $800,000. They're only going to get $720,000. And they put in a down payment of X amount of dollars. So there's a shortfall in there somewhere that somebody's going to have to come up with. Now, typically what will happen in this case is that the seller and the buyer will meet halfway. The buyer will chip in a little extra money and the seller will lower their price somewhat, and therefore the buyer gets the property. It means that the buyer has to come out a little bit out of pocket for a little bit extra money. So depending on how you look at it, that could be good or bad for the buyer. But that isn't the only possibility. The other possibility is that the buyer makes the seller come down all the way to appraised value. And that can work out really, really well for the buyer, but your agent and you as a buyer need to be very, very confident about the market circumstances and the market conditions to see if you have that leverage to get a seller to lower all the way. If it's a hot market, that seller may want to take their chances, let the deal fall apart, and go and put the home back on the market. If it's a really, really tough market for sellers, then yes, maybe you as a buyer have a little more leverage to get that seller to come down on their price. But one way or another, somebody's going to have to give up on something. The bank isn't going to do it. So either the buyer has to come up with more money, or the seller has to lower their price, or a combination of the two. Now this brings us to a related question, which is, can a buyer purchase a home above the appraisal price? Absolutely, 100%. Just be aware that you're not going to get that money from the bank. So if you want to buy above appraised value, you can do that, but you're going to have to come up with the additional funds, the additional cash. So if it's only appraised for, if you have a $500,000 property and you want to buy it for $525,000, the bank is only going to lend on the $500,000. So the additional money, you have to come up with that $25,000. So that's something that you need to be aware of. One question that sellers often have is, can I as a seller see the appraisal? Well, the answer to that question, can you see the appraisal? Yes, but you're not likely to. The buyer, the buyer's agent, and the bank are under no obligation whatsoever to share the appraisal with the seller. As a seller, your agent, your listing agent, is there to protect you and your interests, and to keep certain information about you confidential from the other side within the limits of the law. The same is true of the buyer side. The appraisal is between the bank and the buyer. You are not a party to that as a seller. So that's between the buyer and the bank. Now the buyer is going to see the appraisal, and most likely the buyer's agent is going to be aware of the appraisal, but they're under no obligation to share that with you, and they're very unlikely to. When I represent a seller, I let my sellers know, listen, you're not going to be likely to see the appraisal. You know, our job is to get the property under contract for as much as possible, and then we'll deal with whatever we need to deal with when we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. That's what I always counsel my sellers. If the appraisal comes in low, then the seller's going to find out, because there's going to be an issue there, and the bank is going to need to, the deal is going to need to be addressed. So when the appraisal comes in low, the seller usually will find out about that, and as they rightly should, because they need to, both sides of the deal need to figure out what to do in order to get the deal across the finish line, or just cut their losses and go their separate ways. Now here's a question that buyers and sellers often have, and that is, why do appraisals come in at sale price? Well, the answer to that question is pretty straightforward. Appraisers have no vested interest in either over-appraising or under-appraising a property. They want the deal to go forward. The appraisers are not trying to be a roadblock to the deal or to help out any particular side. Their job is to give an impartial opinion on the value of a property. That being said, they want the deal to go forward. So they're going to generally appraise a property at value or at contract price unless they just absolutely cannot justify the price. Now that cuts both ways. They're not going to underappraise a property unless they simply cannot justify the price that the property is under contract for based on the recent comparable sales. By the same token, they're not going to push the value of a property more than a certain amount beyond the comparable sales because they have to be data driven. Their opinions have to be based on the data, and the data is basically what has closed recently of a similar type. Now, if the property is substantially better, materially better than another property similar, so let's say you have exactly the same floor plan on the same block, one is renovated and the other one is not, that renovated property is certainly going to appraise higher, and the appraisers have a margin for that. But it's generally not as much as the seller would hope, and it's generally not the full value of the actual renovation. So they're going to be able to push it a little bit, but not a ton. But generally speaking, things are going to come in or near the contract price because the appraisers are looking for moving the deal forward, and they will only torpedo a deal or give a different price opinion when it's really, really justified or when they can't justify anything else. I guess I should also talk a little bit about how appraisals are actually done, since I've kind of alluded to it. Now, typically what happens is an appraiser is going to visit the home. They're going to look at the outside of the home, and they're going to look at the interior of the home, all of the interior space. They're also going to take measurements, measure all the rooms, take dimensions, measure the property, and they're going to take what they see and the notes that they take and compare it against comparable sales, as I mentioned in another segment of this video. Now, the comparable sales could go back 3, 6, or 12 months, usually somewhere in the 3 to 6 month range. If it hasn't been a very active market, then they might go back as far as a year. And they're going to look at those comparable sales of very, very similar properties. Now, appraisers are super specific. If your property has a balcony and the other properties don't have a balcony, an appraiser is going to take note of that. They'll either not compare those properties to yours because it's not comparable, or if he doesn't have any other options, he or she will make some kind of a price adjustment based on the fact that your property has features that can't be found in other properties nearby. So they're very, very specific. They're going to take into account everything. Garages, parking, exposures, windows, room sizes, room count, etc., etc., etc. And they're going to try to find 3 to 5 properties that are very, very, very close matches to yours and see what they've sold for in the last 6 months, give or take. And based on that, they will determine the value of your property. So that's how the appraisal works. Now, what do I do in the appraisal process, me as a listing agent? Now, if I represent you as a listing agent, one of my primary jobs, well, I have 2 primary jobs with regards to the appraisal. One is when we initially do a valuation on your home, we're going to do what's called an appraiser's approach. So when I evaluate homes, when I give sellers or potential sellers the market value of their home, I'm looking at it with the eyes of an appraiser, because ultimately what the appraiser says is what matters most, because we know that 85 to 90% of buyers are going to be using a bank loan, and we know that the bank loan has to get approved based on what the appraiser says. So it does us no good to get a house out there listed and under contract at a price that it won't appraise for. It just doesn't do anyone any good. My job is to help protect the equity of my selling clients. And if I do that, I'm actually hurting their equity because they've had to pay, carrying costs on this property if they're still paying mortgage and taxes that whole time. And then they've wasted all that time. So now they have to relist the apartment, and while it's on the market, their price is having to go down and they're having to pay out. So their equity is declining. My job is to protect that equity. And the way I do that is to make sure that we price the home properly up front. And that means using an appraisal approach to evaluating the property. Then, when it's actually under contract and the appraiser is going to come to the property, my job is to pull the comps again and see if anything new has come up, and make sure that I'm there with the appraiser to point out features and benefits of my client's property versus the other ones, and to make sure that the appraiser's comps are accurate, because there's no guarantee that that appraiser is going to do a good job and pull all the right comps. So I'm going to come armed with comps as well, and I'm going to sit with that appraiser and go through their work, and I'm going to make sure that I fight for my client and make sure that that appraiser is doing his job right and that the value is as high as it can be for the home. So that is basically a primer course on appraisals. We hit a lot of information there, all about appraisals and how they work, who orders them, when they're ordered, why they're ordered, how they work. So I hope you found the video helpful. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up. We're really trying to grow the channel, and your help is valuable to that. So give it a thumbs up if you think this information was helpful or valuable. Share it with other people if you think they can use it. That would help us a lot as well. And once again, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure to hit the subscribe button down below and hit the bell, and you'll get notifications of all the new content on this channel. Once again, my name is Daniel Ackerman with the Queen's Home Team at Keller Williams. Thanks again for watching, and hope to see you again soon.